For more than 2 centuries, no one could say exactly who they were. Some said Portuguese, some said Turkish or Jewish, or the lost survivors of a shipwrecked crew. Some swore they were the vanished colonists of Roanoke, walked inland and gone native. The families themselves insisted on 2 things: Portuguese or Native American, never anything else. Historians treated it as a charming Appalachian riddle, a mystery too tangled to solve. It was a beautiful set of stories. It was also a wall, built carefully, brick by brick, to keep something hidden, and the DNA was about to find it. To find the Melungeons, you have to leave the main roads. You climb into the ridges and hollows of East Tennessee and Southwest Virginia, into a landscape of steep timber and thin soil, the kind of country people pass through rather than settle, and yet families settled here generations ago and stayed and became something the surrounding world could never quite name. They were dark-skinned, but not in a way their neighbors understood, lighter than the enslaved and freed black families of the valleys below, darker than the Scots-Irish and English farmers who shared their churches and their county roads. They had European features and European surnames. They spoke English. They farmed, worshipped, married, and were buried like everyone else. And still, for 2 centuries, the question followed them everywhere they went. What are you? The answer, depending on who you asked, was a small library of legends. Some said the Melungeons were the descendants of shipwrecked Portuguese sailors, cast onto the Atlantic coast and driven inland. Some said Turkish, brought as laborers and forgotten. Some said Jewish or Moorish, or the children of a wandering Mediterranean people who had lost their way and their history together. Others reached further back to the lost colony of Roanoke and imagined the vanished English colonists walking west into the mountains and marrying into native nations. The names changed. The shape of the story did not. The Melungeons were always from somewhere else, somewhere exotic, somewhere far across the water. The families themselves offered their own answers, and they offered them with force. We are Portuguese. We are Indian. Grandparents passed these claims down like deeds to land, fierce and unqualified, to be defended rather than discussed. A child who asked too many questions learned quickly that some doors in the family history were closed for a reason. The pride was real. So was the insistence. And historians, for the most part, treated all of it as a charming Appalachian puzzle, a regional curiosity too tangled and too old to ever fully solve. It was a beautiful set of stories. It was also incomplete, because the legends, for all their variety, never quite explained themselves. Consider the first and most romantic theory, the Portuguese one. It was repeated so often in so many households that it took on the weight of fact. But no Portuguese settlement was ever documented in these mountains. No ships, no records, no colony, only the word itself, handed down with unusual care. A memory with no source behind it is not quite a memory. It is something else. The lost colony theory was lovelier still. The idea that Roanoke's missing settlers had survived, walked inland, and left their blood in the hills of Appalachia is a story America has always wanted to be true. And yet the distances were vast, the timeline strained, and the evidence amounted to little more than a handful of shared surnames and wishful arithmetic. It explained a feeling. It did not explain a people. The Native American claim was the most grounded of the 3 and the most emotionally charged. Many Melungeon families genuinely believed it, and some intermarriage with native communities almost certainly occurred. But the tribal affiliations were vague. the documentation thin, and the claim, conveniently, offered a respectable explanation for darker skin in a country that punished other explanations severely. That last detail would matter more than anyone realized. Here is the problem that sat underneath every theory. Isolation and legend can explain a mystery. They cannot explain an origin. Each story accounted for how the Melungeons stayed hidden and misunderstood. None of them accounted for where these specific families, with these specific features, in this specific corner of the mountains, had actually come from. The legends were answers shaped to comfort or to protect. They were not answers drawn from evidence. For 300 years, that was where the matter rested. The Melungeons were a question the historical record could not close. The record had simply run out of places to look. What no one yet understood was that the answer had been traveling quietly inside them the whole time, waiting for a tool that did not yet exist. The tool finally arrived in 2012. That year, a study appeared in the Journal of Genealogy with a title that sounded almost anticlimactic: Melungeons, a multi-ethnic population. It was the first peer-reviewed genetic investigation these families had ever received, the work of researchers including Roberta Estes, Jack Goins, Janet Crane, and Penny Ferguson. They had done something the legends never could. They had gathered DNA from the documented core Melungeon lines and read what was actually written there. The science they used divides neatly along two lines of descent. The Y chromosome passes from father to son, unbroken, generation after generation, tracing the direct paternal line back across centuries. Mitochondrial DNA does the same through mothers, from mother to child, marking the maternal line. Together, they form a kind of double signature, two threads reaching back into the past from opposite directions. And when the researchers followed those threads for the Melungeons, the threads did not lead to Portugal or Turkey or a lost English colony. The paternal lines, the Y chromosomes carried by the founding Melungeon men, were overwhelmingly sub-Saharan African. The maternal lines, the mitochondrial DNA, were predominantly European. In plain terms, the earliest Melungeon families were the children of African men and white women of Northern and Central European descent. Unions that had formed, the evidence suggested, in early colonial Virginia in the brief and largely forgotten window before the racial laws of the American colonies hardened into something rigid and merciless. Imagine a household in 17th century Virginia before the categories were fully built. An African man, free or indentured, and a European woman, working the same ground, sharing the same rough frontier. For a short time, such unions were possible, even ordinary. Then the laws began to close, one statute at a time, defining who could marry whom, who was free, who was property, who counted as white. And the children of those early couples found themselves on the wrong side of lines that had not existed when their parents met. So they moved up into the mountains, away from the courthouses and the registries, into the hollows where a family could be left alone. And somewhere along that journey, the story changed. This is the twist that reframes everything. The Portuguese identity was never an ancient memory carried across the sea. It was a shield, invented and maintained with deliberate care. To be called Portuguese was to be foreign, exotic, and crucially, not African, in a country where African descent meant the loss of nearly every right a person could hold. Some Melungeon families went to the census takers directly and asked to be recorded as Portuguese rather than mulatto, or free person of color. The legend was not a lie told for pride. It was a strategy told for survival. And here is where the story reaches the living. When the DNA results came back, many descendants were not comforted. They were shaken. The ground beneath their own family history had quietly shifted. Generations of family law had insisted on Portuguese blood, on Indian blood, on anything but this. And now the sequences said otherwise. One descendant reportedly admitted that the hardest part was not the African ancestry itself, but realizing how much energy their family had spent, for how long, to keep it hidden. The grief was not for the past, it was for the silence. But attitudes have shifted. Where an earlier generation hid the truth, many descendants today are reaching for it, claiming the full story of who they are rather than the safer fiction their ancestors needed. They have come to see the Melungeons not as a curiosity to be solved, but as something far more important. A window into America's earliest mixed communities, formed in a moment before the country had decided to forbid them. The DNA did not destroy the Melungeon story. It restored it. It returned to these families the one thing the legends had quietly taken, the truth of where they came from, which leaves only the question the Melungeons leave with all of us. What has your own family chosen to forget? And what would the record inside you say if you finally asked it?